All right. Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Like I said, my name is Matt Porn. I'm the lead pastor. So glad you are here this morning. And I just want to say, welcome. I'm glad to be back. Some of you know last weekend we were in Florida. And I know you're so sad for me. I know, I get it. But we had a great vacation. And so I appreciate all the team doing things while we were gone. We had a great vacation. So real quick, before we jump into our teaching this morning, I do want to add my voice to the Treasure in a Field campaign open forums. These are really crucial events, meetings for you to attend. So if you have not been at a meeting, if you're not in a small group, these are great meetings. It's really crucial that you make one of these meetings, okay? And you'll get the information about the campaign, about the building, all those kind of things, and you can answer questions or get your questions answered, all those kind of things. This, folks, is the next season of our church. This is where we are going, and so it is crucial for everyone to be in on what's going on, and so we don't want to leave you behind. So please, please, please register. You can scan the QR code in front of you for one of those. The first one's next Sunday, all right? So make sure you get in on one of those, okay? Some of you, you're in a small group, you're gonna have your thing coming up probably in the next week and a half, something like that. So if you're in a small group, you will get that as well. All right. So with that, then we're going to jump into our teaching for the day. If you want to grab a Bible, you can turn to the book of Hosea in the Old Testament. That's where we're going to land today, looking at several verses there. If you didn't bring a Bible and you would like to use a paper one, there are some spread about every other seat in front of you. You can grab one of those. Or you can simply go, and this is different, so you have to pay attention to me, okay? If you go to simply do this. Scan the QR code on the back of your program to go to our interactive message notes on sermons.church. Sermons.church has changed things, and so you now either have to download the app, which you can do if you want to, or you can just scan the QR code each week to get there. Or you can also go to our live services link on our website or our YouTube channel links, things like that. But the easiest thing to do in this room is just to go to that QR code, all right? And in that place, our verses will be there, our points, our fill-in-the-blanks, everything, so you can go there today, all right? All right, so y'all ready for a really challenging message this morning? You guys are not. You need a little more coffee, all right? Well, here, I'm going to give it my best shot, all right? I'm going to start up asking a question. How many of you plan on one day committing adultery and cheating on your spouse? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, I figured that would be okay, how many of you plan on getting married, having a few kids, and then planning on having a very slow, bitter, ugly divorce? Okay, I figured there'd be no one in the room. All right, now, I know those are weird questions, right? But it's interesting because when you think about that, I asked the question, like, who's plans on doing this? Nobody raises their hand, but it's interesting because according to statistics, somewhere around 50% of people commit adultery. Somewhere around 50% of people end up in divorce. And so nobody plans on doing so, and yet a lot of people do. Why is that? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, but one reason I believe is that I think society does a really horrible job of preparing people for marriage. Actually, I would even argue that society is more successful at preparing people for divorce. What I mean by that is that like dating really has kind of become preparation for divorce, I think, in society. And what I mean is that there used to be things that were kind of reserved for marriage, but now the difference between, for a lot of people, dating and marriage is often just a little ceremony one day. That becomes just the only thing that's different. Often the people who are dating, what they do is they often act the way that married people do. They do things that married people used to do. Things like say, I love you and I give my heart to you. Physical things, sharing our bodies with each other, staying the night in the same bed, sharing the same bathroom and sink with a toothbrush and living together, all those kind of things. Many people will just do what married people used to do while they are dating. They sort of kind of pretend to be married and do married things. And so when it doesn't work out, what often happens in our culture is that people just take their toothbrush and their broken heart and they basically just practice divorce. That's what happens in our society. And basically what happens is when you do that with 2 or 3 or 4 people in your lifetime, it becomes just really easy when it's actually in a marriage to really just keep that trend going. Society has trained us for divorce. Look, many of you will be married one day, or some of you in the room, I know you're married now. And the truth is, and if you're married, you know this, that you're going to have bumps in the road. It's just natural life. That's how it works out. And the normal logic in today's society is that when things get tough, when they get a little rough, then just take your toothbrush and go somewhere else. That's kind of how things work out these days. But what I want to do today is I want to look at a story in the scripture that I'm going to tell you up front is really painful. It's actually very painful, but I think at the same time, it's really beautiful. And what we're going to see is that when there is every good reason for divorce in this text, that sometimes God has something different in mind. All right, and so today we're going to be wrapping up our message series called Once Upon a Marriage, Valuable Lessons from Biblical Couples. And we're going to be doing so today by looking at a couple named Hosea and Gomer. Okay, Hosea is the man, Gomer is the woman. And what we're going to see is that they have a marriage that is, I'm going to just really be upfront, it's really messy, all right? And there's, in so many ways, every reason for this marriage to end in divorce, but God calls these people to something very significant, very different than even what our culture is doing today. And so our title today is Hosea and Gomer, Unfailing Love. All right. Now, I want to be upfront and tell you I'm going to be a little bit different today than what we normally do. Normally, I would give you a chunk of text and we'd read that and we'd get our points out of that, but we don't have time to read the entire book of Hosea, which is where the story and marriage of Hosea and Gomer unfolds. And so I would just encourage you this week, take some time, read the whole book yourself. All right. So what I'm going to be doing, instead of one main text, I'm going to be kind of summarizing much of the story, and then we're going to be dropping into key verses and points in their journey, and I'll have you write a few things down as well as we go on. All right. So let me give you the context, though, as we begin in the story. This in history was about 760 years before the birth of Jesus. Jeroboam II, he's the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. And at this time in history, they're kind of enjoying a kind of unprecedented time of prosperity. Things are going really, really well. And the unfortunate thing is, and I think this happens a lot, but oftentimes when there's a people group or a culture that is experiencing economic increase, right, what often happens is that then there is moral and spiritual decrease. Okay, there's economic increase, spiritual and moral decrease is happening. That's what's happening in this time. And so what God does is that in this moment, he's kind of seeing this happen and unfold, and he raises up a prophet named Hosea, all right, to speak into what I'm going to call today, he's going to speak into the spiritual adultery of the day, of the time. Okay, so keep that in mind as we're going through this today. He's going to talk about the spiritual adultery and sin of the people. Hosea chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, it tells us even in the beginning, this is a very unusual story. God is going to ask Hosea to do something that is sort of insane. All right, chapter 1, verse 2 says, "When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, 'Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her.'" The Hebrew word there, if you actually look it up, the promiscuous woman could also be kind of translated as harlot or prostitute. So God tells this prophet to go marry a very immoral woman. And this is right up in the front of the book. And you may be thinking what I did this week, like, wait a second, why would God do that? Well, he says why in the second part of these couple of verses. He says, because like an adulterous wife, this land, the people of Israel, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord, spiritual adultery. So he, Hosea, married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now again, pause. Again, you might be thinking like I did, why in the world would God tell this young prophet to go marry a prostitute? This story, I know, I'm going to acknowledge up front, it's very difficult to stomach, right? But what we have to understand is in this story that there are layers upon layers in this text, okay? What we're going to see today is that there's one layer that's a very literal story between Hosea and his unfaithful wife, Gomer, okay? But we're also going to see that there's another layer which is a picture, kind of a real picture of God. As Hosea, what we're going to see him do, he's going to love his wife despite her immoral behavior. And it's kind of foreshadowing this idea that God loves an immoral people, in this particular context, the nation of Israel. But just like another layer of this is that God is really, if we can kind of take this on us, that God is loving you and me. He's loving us as we are like Gomer so much of our life, and we reject him and sin against him day after day. And throughout the story, there are layers upon layers upon layers that we have to make sure we're aware of, buried in this very disturbing yet very beautiful marriage. And we'll see that at the very end today. And so let me do this. I want to kind of set this up for you to hopefully make a little bit more sense and try to kind of model this relationship and what it might look like in the context of our day in 2026, all right? And so if they were living today, it might look something like this. You've got this girl, right? She's got a pretty bad past, and one day she meets this young pastor, right? And God tells him, hey, I want you to marry this woman. So he's thinking, great, God has directed me to this woman. This is going to work out great. It's going to be awesome. It's God's plan, right? She's thinking, whoa, like this guy's great. Like he's not just looking for the one thing like other guys that I've had in my life, and he's got a good job, and I like his family. Like he's a decent man. He's finally a decent guy, likes me. And so they go and they get married and they go off on their honeymoon. They go to Hawaii and boom, they get pregnant. You know, ever have people like have the honeymoon babies? They have a honeymoon baby, okay? They get pregnant. Things are going real. They're happy, thinking about their great future together, all right? But then life happens, much the way it maybe has happened in your life as well. His ministry picks up, lots of activity at the church, and so he's spending more time there, and he's not really helping with the baby. Like he's like poopy diapers, I don't want to have anything to do with that. All those kind of things, like things are happening like that for his life, and then, like she's upset. She just had a baby, and now she's dealing with all the complexities of that from the physical side of things and the emotional side of things. She's sort of kind of feeling trapped in this season of her life, so she's not really paying attention to him, and he's then feeling neglected by her. Things are not going well right now, okay? Kids are having a crazy time back there. So all that's going on, and then one day something happens. We don't know quite what happened, but it could be something like an old boyfriend reaches out to her and inboxes her on Facebook. She goes down to the gym because she's going to try to get back into shape after having the baby, and she ends up with a cute trainer, and he's really paying significant attention to her. Maybe she gets a part-time job because finances are kind of tight, and so there's a guy there that she's working with that really is really nice and showing her some attention. Something happens, and this woman believes what I'm going to call today the most common marriage misconception that there is. And this is actually on your handout today. You can write this down. She buys into the lie and believes that what I'm missing is better than what I have. The most common misconception in marriage, what I'm missing is better than what I have. Such a common thing that many people grab onto today. In this day and age. And so what we're going to see in her, what she decides is this in verse 5 of Hosea chapter 2. Again, I don't have time to read the whole thing. Read the whole thing on your own time. Hosea chapter 2, verse 5. Take a look. She says this. She says, I will go after my lovers. She says it right there pretty clearly. I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. She basically is saying, although this guy, Hosea, he's great. He offers me so much. She's saying there are a few things that he doesn't offer me that, listen, I think I can get from someone else. And look, maybe it was because this guy got busy, maybe he got distracted, maybe he wasn't on his game, or maybe some other guy, he listens to her, he compliments her, maybe he brought her little gifts, or maybe he's got a better income, maybe he promised her more things. If the roles were reversed and it was the guy instead of the girl in this role, it might be for him, like she thinks I'm cool, right? She doesn't nag on me all the time and tear me down. She laughs at my corny jokes. She enjoys watching sports with me. And the most common thing that I hear, even because I see this happen many times in my ministry, is that, well, we just have so much in common. But regardless, whether it's man or woman, in the midst of though it's a woman in our story, there's quite a trade that takes place in this text that ends up being, like, really, to me, honestly, way less that there was in the first place in the story between Hosea and Gomer. By the way, the thing that God ordained. There's this belief in what I am missing is better than what I have. And here's what I want. I want to just really get this to you today. Folks, you need to understand this. Listen, the truth is this, bring this in the room. Whenever the grass looks greener somewhere else, it's time for us to water our own yard. I'm going to let that sit for a minute. When the grass looks greener somewhere else, it's time to water our own yard. Look, if it looks better somewhere else, like over the fence, it's only because we can't smell the poo that's over there. Because if you get close enough, because nobody's perfect, there's going to be some there too. Okay? And here's the reality, right? Not only is maybe there isn't poo over there, but the reality is, like maybe we just don't know the hard work that it took to get there. Some of you guys know we have an incredible maintenance director here at the church. His name is Bob, and that guy works his tail off on our front lawn. Like he actually dug up all the I've never in my life dug up a dandelion in the lawn. He dug up all the dandelions on. Like the reason our lawn looks good is because Bob puts all the work in. And so just because it looks good, maybe there's something over there you might need step in if you go over there, but you also don't know the work it took to get there, right? And so we got to understand this concept, this misconception of what I'm missing is better than what I have. The truth is, folks, no, that is not, because what I'm missing is not better than what we have if we invest in what we have. Do you understand that? It's not better than what we have if we invest in what we have. But what happens is that life starts happening, and commonly what people do is they start to believe this lie that what I'm missing is better than what I have. And that's what Gomer does in this story. She goes out and she meets a couple of other guys. She gets pregnant and has a couple of kids. Now, we're not told expressly in the text that this is how this plays out and how this went down, but we know it is that she was unfaithful to Hosea by the names that God says to name the children in Hosea chapter 1. If you want to write that down, Hosea chapter 1, that's where I'm going to get this next part from. So we know that this is how that she was unfaithful to Hosea because of the names of these kids. Gomer has a daughter, and God says to name her. It'll come up on the screen. There it is, Lo Ruhama, okay? And this name literally means unpitied, unloved, not loved by the true father. Which that means that's not Hosea's kid. She then gets pregnant then with a son, and God says to call him Lo-Ami. And Lo-Ami means no kin of mine, not related to me. Again, not Hosea's kid. See, life happens, and Gomer believes the lie. What I'm missing is better than what I have, and things get just really, really messy. Like really messy and stay messy for a really, really, really long time. But what we have to remember, again, in this story is that I said that the story and book of the Bible has many layers, right? So that's kind of the literal layer, right? But if we look a little bit deeper, these names of these two children, right, are not just like the fact that Gomer was unfaithful to Hosea, but these names were actually revealing the hurt that God has not only with Gomer, but with the entire nation of Israel, his people, because they were rejecting him over and over and over again. Remember, they were committing this spiritual adultery. And if you've ever been cheated on, you kind of know the pain of that. And God in this moment, in this book of the Bible, he feels really cheated on. And so God felt like his people were committing this spiritual adultery. And if you read this entire book, it is really, really painful to watch God hurt. And that's what he does here. He hurts, he's angry, he's jealous, and he has every right to be because he is God. And the truth is, he wants all of us. He wants all of our hearts. Look, if I can for a moment, I want to kind of divert from the literal story and the marriage of Gomer and Hosea for a moment, and I want to look deeply at God's heart for a second. And what I want to talk about is really his two responses to what can be considered this spiritual adultery in life, in our lives as well. This is, I think, a larger layer of this text that we're reading in the book of Hosea, because the truth is, maybe even some of you here today, are sinning seriously against God. And like in the book of Hosea, the truth is God is deeply, deeply hurt by that. And so his first response to it in the text and in our lives, you can write this down, is that he has this very righteous anger. You can write this down. He has this very righteous anger. You may know this, but there is such a thing as unrighteous anger, like righteous anger that's not justified. But there is also righteous anger, like justified anger, right? And we see this back in Hosea chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. God has some serious righteous anger. He says of the people of Israel, not just Gomer, but the entire nation of Israel, he says this. He says, she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold, which they used for Baal. You notice that it went from she to they, right? Because this is about the nation of Israel. And they used for Baal. Baal worship, that was a false god. Verse 9, therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and my linen intended to cover her naked body. So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers. No one will take her out of my hands. And you can kind of just hear, even as you read that, the hurt in God's voice. You hear the jealousy. I mean, right? Like here's the reality, folks. God knows how good he is. Y'all know that? God knows how good he is. And so but he also, because he knows how good he is, he knows how foolish we are for rejecting him, and it hurts him. It makes him angry. You can almost hear him saying like, okay, fine, you know what? You want to do life without me? Fine, do it. See how it goes. I can almost sense that like God says that with marriages today. Like God said, hey, you know what? You want to do your marriage without me? Fine, do it. See what happens. There's this righteous anger in God. It's not wrong anger. It's the right anger, because he should be angry at those things, because we are in our lives and sometimes in our marriages, we are committing spiritual adultery. And I will say this to some of you. Some of you have been into a relationship where there has been cheating going on. You've been betrayed. You find yourself a bit angry. And I just want to encourage you in the midst of that. I think there's time, folks, where having that anger is righteous anger. I mean, sometimes it is righteous anger. You know what? You might say, hey, look, we made a covenant, you and I, before God and our family and our friends, and we made this covenant before him, and that matters to me. And listen, I'm not happy about it. And folks, that's not always an unrighteous stance. But I will also say this, is that God might say, just because you have grounds for divorce doesn't mean you give up. God might say that. There may be a call to fight for this thing, to fight for this relationship, which actually is what we see next from God himself, and actually his call for Hosea. So God responds with this righteous anger first, right? But then there's this beautiful and very sudden shift in God's response. He's angry, and then boom, like as fast as he was angry, he responds very, very differently, very significantly. You can write this down. God responds next then to the spiritual adultery with unfailing love. You can fill that in. A righteous anger, and then an unfailing love. Here's the shift. It happens in Hosea chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. He says this. He says, therefore, I am now going to allure her. Listen to this language. It's so beautiful. I'm going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness, the most dry place, right, where there's nothing else for her to depend on but me, God's basically saying. I'm going to lead her into the wilderness. And look at this. It says, and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. And you might want to, if you're in the Bible, you might want to circle the word Achor. And next to that word, you might want to write the word trouble, because that's literally what it means. The word Achor means trouble. And so what he's saying here is that there's a valley of trouble, right, in the midst of this, that he's going to turn into what? A door of hope. And folks, I'm going to take a turn. This is going to be where the encouraging part of the message happens, okay? Folks, you want to know the best way to have a great marriage? Do you want to know? I'm going to give you the answer today. Here's the answer to have a great marriage. Listen, walk through the valley of Achor, walk through the valley of trouble together with your spouse. Walk through this valley of Achor, walk through the valley of trouble until you get to the door of hope. Walk through the valley until you get to the door of hope. Now, what does that mean? Okay, it means that you walk together, hand in hand, right? When there's a big problem, when there's a small problem, when there's an in-between problem, you walk together, hand in hand, and then you say, okay, we're going to keep doing this until the door of hope arrives. Listen, this is so true. Like, folks, some of the best marriages I know of, listen, they have walked through the valley of Achor. They have walked through the valley of trouble. Listen, they have walked through the valley of betrayal. They have walked through the valley of adultery. Yes, they have. Yes, they've walked through the valley of pornography. They've walked through the valley of rejection. They have walked through the valley of deceit. And when they have walked through the valley together, now, years later, a couple years later, months later sometimes, whenever God's doing whatever he's doing, right? They have done this, and when God leads the way, they come to the door of hope. And here's what I want you to catch today, folks. You and I can come to the door of hope. The Bible says that we will have, in this life, we will have trouble. Listen, you might marry or be in a relationship with the nicest, most loving person in the world, and you're still going to have trouble with them. You're still going to have a valley of Achor with them. But here's the key. Are you going to walk together to get to the door of hope, or are you going to give up? That's the key. You know, in the series, I've been talking about the fact that Lee and I have been married 23 years. We've been together 31 years. And you know, here's the reality. I think some people are like, oh, well, you guys just love each other so much. You're just perfect. And listen, what I try to do up here, I don't want you to believe that Lee and I are perfect, because we're not. I try to share our stuff up here because I want you to know that I'm just like a human, just like the rest of you, though I get to be up here and teach, and God's had this call in my life. Like, marriage is hard and it's work. And so we have gone through the valleys. Lee and I have been in the valley of Achor. I was thinking just this morning, there was a season where I was a campus pastor at a campus on the north side of town for a church, and she was at the other campus, and it was about 6-7 months that we were like not serving in ministry together. And God has designed us and wired us to do ministry together. She's my helpmate, and it was really tough season for us, to the point where in that 6 months, 7 months, like Leah would say to me quite often, she says, I love you, but I don't like you right now. And so I will tell you, that was a valley of Achor to us. But listen, what we decided to do is we were gonna go hand in hand through the valley until we get to the door of hope. And we got to the door of hope, and we're now on the other side of that. By the way, we didn't just get to the door, we walked through the door. Okay? And so I want you to know, folks, listen, I know some of you today, listen, you're here this morning and you were in the valley of Achor. You were in the valley of trouble, and you don't have hope. And I want you to just please catch this today. There's hope. There's always hope. I have seen the messiest of the messy in people's relationships. I've walked through messy things in my own life in relationships. And listen, because God is involved in these things, when God is involved in these things, man, hope is never off the table. It's never off the table. Don't give up. I told you this was a hard message this morning, didn't I? This is a tough one. It's a tough message, and actually, as we begin to wind down here in just a few minutes, it doesn't get any easier from here, honestly. God is going to say something, and then read this again on your own time this week. God is going to say something amazing to this man, Hosea, who's been, by the way, nothing but faithful to his wife, Gomer, and really been nothing but betrayed by his wife. And as we fast forward the story, she, at the end, is now like kind of left him. He continues to pursue her. Try to do everything he can to love her again and again and again and again and again and again. And she's out continuing to give herself to man after man after man after man after man. And you can imagine the gut-wrenching pain of all of that for Hosea. Eventually, she ends up in this place where she's actually now doing this for money. So she's actually in the business of this now. But God gives a very clear, albeit very challenging message to Hosea, the betrayed Hosea. And I would even say for some of you, if you've been the betrayed spouse, he gives a message to us as well. Summarized, God says this to Hosea. He says, come up on the screen, you can fill this in. It says, God's message to the betrayed spouse is, forgive and love as you've been forgiven and loved. Forgive and love as you've been forgiven and loved. And in my mind, I'll just be really honest, transparent with you. In my mind, if God would tell me that, I'd be like, no, God. Seriously? Like she's doing that. She's had her chance. I've tried. I'm done. But God says something. He tells Hosea this. In Hosea 3:1, it says, the Lord said to him, go, show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and it is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. Love her. Love her as God is loving you right now, Hosea. Loving, by the way, if we can transfer this, he's loving us right now as we don't deserve. As we continue to worship the idols of this world, he says, love her as God continues to freely love us, even as we openly and consistently reject his goodness. Love and forgive, he says. No, I don't think that's easy. But he says, love and forgive, the same way he has loved and forgiven us. Now, there's no guarantees in this story what she's going to do, what Gomer's going to do. And there's no guarantees that this marriage isn't going to end up in divorce. I mean, the truth is there's no guarantees that any marriage isn't going to end up in divorce. If you do everything right, there's no guarantees. But even though we can't control the outcome, God is very, very clear on what we should do, and that is that we should love and forgive as we have been loved and forgiven. Now, there might be some of you really mad at me right now because you're like, wait a second, you don't know what he did. You don't know what she did. I get that, okay? So hang with me. What this doesn't mean, and I got to be very clear, what this doesn't mean is that you now become a doormat. I'm not saying that. Okay? I'm not saying that you got to be a doormat, but what I am saying is that that maybe you hold on to the hope of that God would do something, and so you decide to stay and you try to reconcile, and so. But here's what I think is important. Sometimes if you're that person that's trying to reconcile, it doesn't mean that you don't bring new rules into the game. For example, if his problem is that he always looks at pornography, then maybe the new rule of the game is to say you can't have your computer in the house. I think that's a fair statement to say if he's dealing with pornography to do that. Maybe it doesn't mean that you don't move to a different town. It doesn't mean that you don't make some changes, right? But it does mean this, is that you may choose to stay even though there's no guarantees. And by the way, this is the hard part of this story, and there's nothing easy about it because, listen, I promise you what's going to happen in your life, because it's happened in mine too, in my previous relationships and things like that before I got married, is that people like, things will happen, and somebody will screw up, and they'll say, dump him. Oh, just dump him. Dump her. Get divorced. That's what we've been trained to do. That's what society tells us to do. But it may be that God would say, maybe, and I've actually had a relationship with people that this is exactly what God said. God said, maybe it's not time to give up yet. Like Hosea, because here's the reality. Marriage, folks, is really, really, really important, and marriage is really, really, really sacred. Now, saying that, I'm not trying to condemn any of you in the room who have been divorced. Listen, I know sometimes, as I mentioned, you can do everything right, and you're going to end up divorced because someone else won't do everything right. I understand that. But it doesn't mean that there isn't value in doing all you can to try and honor God in the covenant made. I hope that makes sense to you today. Let me tell you the end of the story. I'm going to have Abby come up. She's going to play keys as we get ready to close. Here's the end of this story. Again, read this on your own time. God tells this prophet to go and to pursue his immoral wife once again. And here's what he does. It's incredibly crazy to me. But he shows his love to his wife again by doing this. He goes and he takes his own money and he purchases his wife out of prostitution. He takes his own money. He pays for his wife. Wow. Now, we don't know how this ended. The text doesn't tell us. There's no record of what she did. But my thought is this. This is what I was thinking this week as I was putting this together. Once he did that, once he bought her out of the life that she was living, how in the world could she have ever walked away from him again? Because he loved her. Hosea loved Gomer enough to purchase her out of her sin. And the reason that I lean towards that, and I believe that might be the response to what happened, is because when I think about and when I look at what God did for us through Jesus Christ, right? I ask the same question, right? Like how, when we just celebrated this in communion, right? That God put his son on the cross to take on my sin so that ultimately I would experience and have the love of the Father.